As you see, the title is Strangers at the Table When the Foreign Feels Familiar. So let's start with a little bit of imagination. So I want you all to imagine that you're walking into a restaurant. It is beautifully designed. The light is ambient. It is not hitting you in the face. You are seated at the table. You get a menu in your hand. And then someone approaches the table, looks at you and smiles, but does not say a word. Not because that person is rude, but because in this restaurant, words are not the first language. So we look at strangers as people who we haven't met before. But at a lot of these tables, we end up being the stranger ourselves. We went into this restaurant thinking that yes, we will be welcomed with courtesies. Hello sir, how are you sir, how are you madam, what would you like to order, etc., etc. And then we meet a person who's doing all of that with his eyes, with his hands, and most of all, with his attention to us. That changes things. Initially, you kind of panic a little and you look for where is the manager, someone who can come and speak to us and make it normal. But then slowly you start realizing that your server has got it all in control. The water has been poured before you asking for it. The bread has been kept right where you can reach for it. And you then start realizing that you are possibly being heard more carefully than you've been heard in the past. So that is what we wanted to create. So when we started looking for people to hire them for this job, I went to various families. I would be sitting in their home, talking to their parents, their relatives, their friends, everyone. And they would be talking to me and I'd be telling them, I'm trying to make a restaurant like this. And you know what this will do? This will give your child employment. And then I would notice that the parents would turn and look at their child. The child would be around 20 years, 30 years also. But for the parents, he or she is still a child. And a child with a disability. And a child that they think needs protecting. And a child that they think will always need protecting. So it's not that they doubted me, they doubted the world, because for 2 or 3 decades that they had brought up their child, the world had failed their child. There were so many challenges, so many rejections at school, at college, at a shop counter, at a driving school. So everywhere they faced a lot of rejection. So these parents had actually built a fortress of protection around their child. And here I was telling them, just throw open the gates. But why should they trust me? And I saw that there was a gap. So driving home one day, I was thinking to myself, how can I change this, etc. So I told myself that the next time I'm in one of the homes, I will try and observe a little more. So the very next day I went to one of the homes and I again pitched the idea to them. Then I looked at the young man who I was trying to hire. He was sitting quietly, not contributing at all to the entire conversation. And I realized that I was talking about what I could do for him. His mother was talking about what he can do and cannot do. His father was talking about his security and his well-being. But none of us were talking to him, the person that I was trying to hire. So that day when I was driving back, I thought to myself, if I cannot talk to him, then I will never know what does he want. So I got a tutor to teach me sign language and I learned basic sign language. My sign language is very poor. My team keeps telling me even now, and they laugh at my sign language. I'm possibly too loud with my gestures. But anyways, and I looked at him and I asked him, what do you want? And I cannot tell you, it is difficult to describe, the expression on the parent's face when they saw a stranger talking to their son in the language that he was proficient in. So that changed things. And we started getting people who would be willing to work with us. And then the restaurant started, it got very popular, etc., etc. Then one day I'm standing in the restaurant and this guest comes to me And he says, you're doing a great thing, congratulations, it's a lovely restaurant, and what you're doing for society, etc., etc. And he asked me, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah, of course you can. And he says, why did you do this? Is there someone in your family who's disabled? It was a fair question. Because these kind of initiatives come about with proximity to someone close to you going through certain challenges. And I looked at him and I said, define family. My family is about 120. He thought I'm being cheeky, but I was not. But my family is about 120 deaf people working in 9 restaurants across 5 cities in India who come in the morning, look after customers, and then lock up and go. What that guest realized, and I saw his expressions change, and hindsight is a wonderful thing, and you can analyze it in different ways. What the guest realized, that it was actually quite simple. It was just a table where my family was serving his family. I come across all such anecdotes every now and then in the restaurant, and sometimes I visit them in their homes also. So I remember once I visited one of my staff in her home, and that changed me forever. So when I was there, I expected what I had expected previously. It will be a nice small home, a proud family, and a cup of chai, right? So I went there, and her mother was there, her father was there, her sister, college-going sister was there, and her mother and her father and her sister could all speak and hear. And I realized that in that family of 4, she was the only one who could not speak and hear. But she was the only earning member of her family. And that, I felt, was when a liability became an asset. What that also did, I kind of started realizing that there is momentum to change. You see, when this happens, then you know that there is validation. A very interesting anecdote with critical questioning. Why? So I called a barista. Barista is a coffee expert, to train my team on how to make a good coffee. Because in restaurants and cafes, coffee is very important. And he was a very well-known trainer. He had a coffee company of his own, and he had coffee machines, and he would goes around the country even now, training people on coffee. So I said, great, here you are, here's my team, here's the interpreter, I'll leave you to it. And I went about doing my work. About an hour and a half later, when he finished training, I went and met him, and I said, so how was it? Did you enjoy it? How were they, etc., etc. What he said kind of, shocked me. He said, this was the toughest training of my life. And I immediately went into a manager mode. I was like, oh my God, was the interpreter not correct? Were the tools not available? What went wrong? Were the students not listening? And he said, no, nothing. They all enjoyed themselves. But the questions they asked me were so rudimentary, and that I didn't have answers for. So I said, like what? What could you not have an answer for? He said, Prashant, I'll give you an example of many that happened during that training session. I'll give you one example. So he told me, he said, I was telling them how to make a good espresso. So he said that I told them, like I have been told, and like I have told in every training session I have taken anywhere, that on top of an espresso is this small thin layer of foam, very tiny thin layer of bubbles. If that layer is consistent, that means it's a good espresso. So people note it down, and they make sure that whenever they make an espresso, then that layer is consistent. He said, but your team did not note it down. Instead, they asked me, why is there that foam? Why is that a mark of quality? Why does it form in an espresso? He said, because I had also just noted it down and never critically questioned myself, I didn't know the answer. And they did this for almost everything he was teaching them. Plato started what could be termed as the first business school ever about 2,200 years ago. He invented critical questioning. Why? Things go out of fashion so quickly, like AI, is going to destroy the other technologies, etc., etc. Disruption happens all the time. But imagine this critical questioning is still relevant 2000 years later. And my boys and girls are practicing it already. However, somewhere down the line, the rest of us have stopped asking why. Somewhere down the line, we have stopped asking the whys, we have stopped questioning. And that obviously doesn't really help us get the answers. We become acceptors of what we've been told and we continue in that direction. Learning from a bit of that, learning from the family anecdote, learning sign language, communicating with them, I kind of changed gradually myself. And things kept on happening. Once a lady called me in the restaurant, wants to meet the owner. So whenever someone asks for me in one of my restaurants, I get very nervous. Because if they ask for the owner, either something great has happened or something really, really bad. So I was like, oh my God. I held myself together and I walked up to her and I said, how can I help you? And she said, this is my 5-year-old son. I am here because of him. And I said, oh, okay. So she said what we had done, and when she was explaining to me, I kind of realized what we had done. A few weeks before, we had actually sent 2 of our team members, deaf team members, to a kindergarten school to just spend some time with them. So build empathy at that age is very critical. So she said that her son came home in the evening and said, Mama, we have to go to that restaurant where people speak with their hands. He did not say where deaf people were. He said where people speak with their hands. So what he had actually done without any lesson in empathy, without any session on sensitizing them, nothing. Because he was a 5-year-old and he was not yet, worldly wise as we call ourselves, he took them as 2 people. Nothing more, nothing less. As 2 people who just spoke with their hands. And that also got me thinking. I thought to myself, we currently are trying to push inclusivity across the world, and it's a very slow change, which that 5-year-old managed to do in one morning. That is change that we, going forward, should look forward to at the start of a person's life. When I started thinking about this concept, I read a lot of papers. In one of those papers, a peer-reviewed paper, it showed the life of a human being from the day you are born to the first few days, then weeks, months, years, and so on and so forth. And it tells you exactly how the human feels in the first few days of being born, and then years, etc. So I superimposed that paper on the life of a human who is who's deaf, who cannot hear. It is because they cannot hear, they cannot speak. They have voice, but it is not that they cannot speak and they cannot hear. They cannot hear, and that's why they cannot speak. Now imagine that this child is growing up. Think of that young man I was trying to hire, and he's okay. He finds everyone in the family, being normal to him, because even the family doesn't know that he cannot hear. Family comes to know maybe about a year into it. Even the Bera test for hearing is only done when they're about 2 years old. So the family comes to know at that time. So family doesn't know, he doesn't know, and he's a kid, he's playing. But slowly as he becomes 3 years or 4 years of age, he starts seeing the difference how he's treated as opposed to his siblings, as opposed to his friends. And slowly he starts imploding and moving away from people. And slowly he starts forming a bond, if he can find, with other people like him or her, and develops a prejudice against the rest of them. Who do children blame when something bad happens to them? They blame their parents. So they also get prejudiced against their family at times. They start blaming the world, And then someone like me walks up to them and says, you know what, here I am. I've come here to change your life. It's not that simple. It's how the humans are wired. So when I put that on it, I realized what all we will have to do to bring them into our fold. We will not just have to sensitize them, we will also have to sensitize ourselves. So it has to meet in the middle. That is what I meant when I said strangers at the table. We are all sitting at various tables in our lives. It could be your team, it could be your classroom, it could be your college, it could be your boardroom. When you sit at that table next time, maybe later today or tomorrow, on that table, please try to identify the person who is not speaking, who is not contributing, and try to sit down with him, talk to him in the language that he understands, and ask him, what do you want? And when you ask him that, listen carefully. Because when you listen carefully is when the foreign becomes familiar. Thank you.